And thank you for joining us for our continued coverage of Mobile World Congress 2013. Tellabs was nice enough to host our machine-to-machine panel discussion today on the floor, on the exhibit floor rather, here at Mobile World Congress 2013. On our panel, right to my left is Narayon Menon of InterDigital, and we have in the middle here Stuart Bennington of Tellabs, of course. And on the end, no stranger to TI now, is Fred Yentz of ILS Technology. Thank you to all three of you taking time out of your busy schedule today to be with us and talk about machine-to-machine, clearly prevalent on the floor here at Mobile World Congress 2013. Fred, I want to start with you. It was said very recently we had a discussion about a quote-unquote tipping point in the industry when machine-to-machine was kind of a burgeoning sector. Can you explain to our audience here what that tipping point was?
Sure. We talked about three things as sort of the tipping points that came up here. First is wireless and connectivity ubiquity. So the affordability and availability is there. So connection is not a challenge. The second piece is the supply chain and the solution set's getting more mature, the tools are getting better. So feasibility is there. And the third piece, which I think is really evident today on the floor here at Mobile World Congress, is the awareness of this solution type. All the way from the business leaders and the C-suites trying to make their business run better, to the vendor community, of which almost everybody here at Mobile World Congress has some sort of a IoT or M2M message.
All right.
Yeah, I would second those points. I think that I agree, there's an increased awareness of machine-to-machine and IoT. There is a broader vision developing it also in terms of what the end game could be in terms of Internet of Things, and a realization that what we have today with machine-to-machine is an important stepping stone in that direction, both in terms of solutions and standards work, right? Moving towards that end goal of a fully interconnected internet world where devices and applications can work together seamlessly.
And I would just add to that our role has been more on the infrastructure side and mobile backhaul connectivity, and we really see some exciting potential from M2M traffic starting to come into the networks and affording new opportunities for operators as a new source of services. One of the things that we help work with operators on is the ability to manage all of these new sessions, where it's not necessarily driving new bandwidth into the network, but you have a virtual scalability issue where you need to make sure that these sessions are able to propagate and extend to all of these different devices out there and connect to the mobile network as effectively as the traditional services.
Narayan, it appears, and we spoke about this yesterday with some of your colleagues over at InterDigital, about apparently another tipping point in the machine-to-machine space in order to keep the entire sector and space moving forward. What is that tipping point?
Yeah, and that has to do with standardization. And we believe that eventually, in the long run, for devices and applications to be able to interoperate seamlessly, right, and to enable the scalability, the scale building that we so heavily need in the machine-to-machine space, standards will become important, right? And there has been some fairly sufficient work done in areas like ETSI, for example, and the TIA areas, and a good amount of standards work has been done, which could be leveraged almost near-term moving forward, right? Eventually, these things have to be knit together more seamlessly, more holistically, because that is very important in terms of scale building and interoperability.
Fred?
I think standards will play a big role. It's interesting when we look at the Internet of Things, it's not so much about the network as much as it is getting the thing makers to actually adopt the connectivity model. We need people who make everything from washing machines to automobiles to connect to the network. Great thing coming into the hall. It's a billboard that I'm sure we can't ever catch on camera. It's it's 10 feet tall and 300 feet long. It says the world's largest smartphone, and it's got a picture of an Audi car. That's a device on the network. So car makers are going to be just like tablet makers when it comes to being put on the network easily, and standards is going to play a huge role in that.
Stuart, would you agree that standards is part of the next tipping point in M2M?
Without question, and it's really striking the right balance between getting the strictest adherence to standards as much as possible without waiting for the ultimate, formalization of every single thing and then sacrificing time to market. So standardization, as with all these new types of services, is a critical piece of the puzzle, and it's something that we think, as the standards mature, it'll drive a lot of these new services and devices connecting to the market.
Narayan hit it on the head, though. there's been a lot of work done, and there's a lot of momentum that can be done right now in the market. We're all looking for more maturity there, but the market will not stop. The need to do this in the business community has been established. The awareness is there. It's just going to move forward quicker now.
Now, Stuart, we talked about this many times on TIA now, about the implications on the network with all these new devices coming out, not only consumer devices, but all the machine-to-machine devices that people may not necessarily see. I'm talking to the right guy here. What are those implications on the network?
So what happens is, traditionally you've had a lot of drivers for new types of mobile services relative to lots of new bandwidth in the network. So you hear about mobile video, you hear about, let's say, cloud services or hosting services that drive physical bandwidth. But with M2M, you have lots of little flows and you have lots of sessions, and so you need this virtual scalability, you need this propagation. But it also, you start to see much more distribution of where these connections come from. And so there's other applications that these applications would drive the need to supplement, let's say, macro cells for traditional mobile connectivity with things like small cells and things like self-optimizing networks, because these devices could be anywhere. It doesn't necessarily map to where consumers would be talking on phones. Could be vehicles, it could be home devices and so forth. So getting the infrastructure right, getting the endpoints right, and doing it in such a way that it doesn't add too much to the network complexity and leverages assets in the ground. That's going to be key.
Now, Fred, again, I had a conversation on the floor yesterday about the growing machine-to-machine sector and the fact that it's becoming more of a business discussion rather than a theoretical discussion. What do you think that means?
Well, I think it's very true. The awareness in the business community is such that if you can make money, save money, or be more compliant through technology, people are going to do that. And M2M and IoT technology and services brings you those three elements of economic value. So it's a C-suite discussion now. It's not a hardcore engineering development community discussion to try to figure out what's possible. Possible's been established. Now it's how do we make money at it, and that's a discussion about funding projects that happen in a boardroom, not in a lab.
And Narayon?
Yeah, I think the discussion around the machine-to-machine space has certainly evolved over the last year or so from a more of a pure technical engineering type of dialogue to a discussion around the ecosystem, the value chain, who are likely to be the players in the value chain, who's going to make money from whom, and also to the aspect of integrating these solutions with legacy business mechanisms that enterprises have, like the CRM systems, supply chain management systems, billing systems, OSS systems. There's a lot more dialogue around that and solutions being built around that as we speak.
Yeah, and clearly there's opportunities for ecosystem partnerships that haven't necessarily been there before. For example, the cloud hosting providers working with mobile carriers in a way that aggregates and processes this information. But also the implications for things like LTE is very interesting, because one of the challenges with LTE from a business model standpoint is that there's a fairly significant upfront investment, and so then you have to make it up over time. So anything like M2M that can afford a new type of service and new type of revenue opportunities that can leverage that infrastructure and an IP-based RAN and those types of things is really valuable and really important. So that's part of the promise here, where it has moved from more of a technical discussion to more of a business model discussion.
Narayan, again, we had a conversation for a good while yesterday with some of your colleagues over at InterDigital. You weren't there for that conversation, but I know you know what we talked about. They talked about if a unified standard is prevalent in the M2M space, that many of the big players in machine-to-machine right now may fall off the map, and those of us that don't really have skin in the game per se, in the machine-to-machine sector anyway, may grow at a much higher rate than the players currently. That was a bit confusing to me. It's even confusing for me to ask that question. What does that mean?
I think what it means is that standardization will certainly enable the smaller players to jump in and kind of plug into the ecosystem more easily, right? Because the interfaces will be better defined, and people will be able to, segue in and interface and interoperate with other devices, other applications more easily. And from our perspective, that is very important, because this is a space, unlike the traditional telco world, it's not a matter of a few large players innovating, right? The reality in machine-to-machine is you have a large number of small players, in fact, in addition to the big guys, right, innovating in this space. So it's very important to bring them in and be inclusive of them, within the ecosystem.
Fred?
I would agree with everything that was said. I don't know that the big players are going to lose a lot, but proportionally, a lot of other participants in this space are going to be able to deliver solutions because of standards. And you know, when we talk about a connected planet, it's kind of all-encompassing. And it's going to need a huge ecosystem of service providers, OEMs that make things, to carriers and MVNOs and other transport mechanisms to connect things. So it's a big play, and standards will make it possible for everybody to participate.
Now back to you, Narayon, just for a moment. Network scarcity, spectrum shortage, clearly a big discussion, and it has been, and it always probably will be for the next number of years. What does that mean for horizontal technology deployment and device management? What does that mean for you guys?
Yeah, what it means is that with machine to machine, it's not so much of a question of the applications themselves requiring a lot of bandwidth, right? Because the applications tend to be bursty, and they require short bursty pieces of bandwidth. It's more of a problem of a large number of devices, billions of devices, maybe trillions of devices, right? Collectively, the bandwidth requirement goes up, right, and can go through the roof. The other issue is, and I think Stuart referred to that earlier, is signaling. You know, when you have such a large number of devices coming in and going, you know, the signaling overheads can end up swamping the network as well, right? So those are some of the issues that the industry is talking about. That's what it really means. Now, some of the standards like 3GPP are trying to address that. They are introducing optimizations within the network to deal with short bursty applications, right? And devices that occasionally use the network, right? Use of white space spectrum is also being proposed in many quarters as a supplement to what you have in the networks today.
Stuart, spectrum shortage, how is that affecting Tellabs?
Well, we basically provide equipment that complements the radios and the devices that optimize what's coming over the spectrum. And so what we see is, just to carry through on the point, there's a premium on functionality that hasn't necessarily been as high in the priorities in the past. So you see a much higher premium because of all the individual flows that are happening on things like latency, on things like retention of the session as long as possible uninterrupted. So again, you drive things like small cell requirements, you drive things like IP awareness all the way out to the cell site. So there's been a lot of push in the past of, hey, can I get by with just Ethernet? Well, IP awareness enables a lot of that ability to maintain those sessions. It also enables, you know, sort of the LTE flattened architecture, so you can get to different endpoints, you can get to localization of content, you can get to aggregation of this, you know, quote, big data that's coming in through all these endpoints. So there are you know, technology implications that are very specific to these new types of flows that are coming in.
Fred, of course you know that TI now launched its Future of the Network documentary series not long ago. You were a big part of that documentary series. Towards the end of episode 1, the piece that we released, you talked about the future of machine-to-machine. What is the single most evident challenge that the machine-to-machine space will face over the next couple of years?
Single, I don't know about single. I think there's going to be the ever pervasive concern about security, custody of data, some of the things around the shared space of cloud and shared business models. But security is something that nobody in this space can ignore, and they have to be tenacious and pervasive in their pursuit to make sure that we're managing things like that.
Narayon, anything to add to that?
I think another challenge is going to be the diversity of devices and networks. It's not going to be just the cellular networks, for example. There's going to be a variety of PAN and LAN networks and a variety of devices. Some constrained devices, some fully capable devices. And part of the challenge is going to be dealing with this diverse suite of devices, right? And being able to cater to each type of device with its own specific requirements and quality of service, et cetera, you know. So that's going to be another significant challenge.
And yeah, I would agree with that, and I would also just reinforce the point that mobility is becoming so much more ingrained into all these services that, you know, we describe it as it's less about a service going forward as more of a feature, right? Everything has a mobility aspect to it, and machine-to-machine just calls that out in even brighter lights because so many of these devices are mobile. Not all of them, but mobility just plays an increasingly important role, and that's one part of the value promise of some of these transitions that are happening, like LTE and like, you know, IP awareness.
And Narayon, sticking with the future of the network topic, if standards don't take a bigger role in the M2M space, where do you see the M2M sector going over the next couple of years? Yeah,
over the next couple of years, I don't think solutions are going to wait necessarily. And as a couple of us mentioned earlier, there has been some good level of standardization done already within, say, ETSI, which could be leveraged near term. If more global standards take more than 2 or 3 years to emerge, I think solutions will move ahead near term, right? With the goal of eventually migrating to a very global, holistic standard, right? Which we truly expect will happen eventually. You know? But near term, I think solutions will move ahead because where there is a need, there will be a way near term. You know? And they will leverage the standards that are available today, and they will move forward with those solutions, right? Eventually, we certainly hope and expect that things will come together in a much more holistic fashion.
Fred, without a unified standard, where do you see M2M over the next 18, 24 months?
Growing radically, with or without.
No impact of whether standards are unified or not unified. No impact in the immediate future.
I think in the short term, you won't see a lot of impact. A lot of the rollouts that are happening now are things that are piloted, you know, in the last 6 months are being piloted now. You're going to see more participants in the ecosystem. You know, so maybe 24 to 36 months out or 5 years out, you'll see maybe a different slope to the curve if standards are done sooner than later. But there's so much momentum right now in the market that I think in the 24-month range, a lot of things that have been started are going to continue to progress. It would be my prediction.
Stuart, would you agree that we're going to push forward whether we have unified standards or not?
I totally agree, but I also agree on the timing that in the short term there's so much momentum that you'll get this big driving effect. Over the longer term, standardization will enable a broader innovation ecosystem, which in turn would have a virtuous effect on the acceptance of the market. But that's, I think, there's still some time to get those standards right and to get those accepted. So.
Stuart, it's a pleasure to have you on the panel. I'm glad you were able to make it. I know you had a busy day today, as all three of you did. Fred, thank you very much for being here. Of course, I've talked to you many times. You were also part of our documentary series. We thank you for that. Narayon, thanks for joining us. And thank you for joining us for our continued coverage of Mobile World Congress 2013. I'd like to thank once again Tellabs for hosting this M2M panel discussion. If you'd like this on-demand feature, please go to tianow.org. So long.